There's a pattern here, Matthew said, tapping the slide with practiced confidence. The boardroom fell silent as the graph flickered on screen. Salary versus impact distribution. It was clean, simplified, stripped of context, just bars, just colors, just one name highlighted in red, Cole D. Mine. I didn't flinch, because the framework he was using, I built it, every axis. Every data point, every performance metric on that slide was rooted in the architecture I had designed. Years ago, when retention dropped during a merger and no one could explain why. Now, here he was, standing before the executive team, claiming it exposed systemic inefficiencies, and I was Exhibit A. High compensation, Matthew continued, clicking to the next slide, but limited direct attribution to post-pandemic innovation. Legacy structure at executive level remains a key drag on budget elasticity. I looked to Martin, the CEO. He didn't react. Not yet. Matthew was new, 2 months in. Brought in during the latest realignment. Tall, polished, always carried a muted leather folio, and never said a sentence without a buzzword attached. He wasn't hired to collaborate. He was hired to replace quietly. My name is Diana Cole. I've spent 12 years building the entire employee strategy framework at Ferricor, a Fortune 200 tech conglomerate that burns through reorgs faster than it approves budgets. I don't run culture workshops. I don't give speeches about empathy. I build retention systems. When teams fracture, when talent drains, when loyalty dips and no one knows why, I'm the one they call. I don't bring slogans, I bring numbers, patterns, interventions that don't look flashy in slides but stop the bleeding before executives even notice it started. But people forget who builds the foundation when they're too busy looking at the rooftop. After the meeting, people shuffled out with polite nods. No eye contact, no follow-ups. In my inbox, I already saw the subject line waiting. Compensation update, effective Q3. I clicked it, a 15% reduction, no explanation, no context, no conversation. The file was sent by HR, but the metadata showed it had been drafted on Matthew's laptop. I sat back in my chair, not shocked, just confirming, because now I had the signal I needed. I opened my local archive, a collection I kept updated every quarter. Not for defense, for clarity. There, in folder structure, were the same metrics Matthew had just used. Only mine weren't cherry-picked. They showed team uplift, retention trends post-strategy shift, predictive flags that reduced resignation risk by 38% in high turnover units. None of that made it to his deck. He didn't want context. He wanted narrative, and he wanted me removed from it. So I opened a draft email. Just one line. Suggest rerunning Q2 retention model with full variable weighting. Filter by manager assignment. D. Cole recipient, Seth Trainer, lead analyst on people analytics. I didn't add commentary. I didn't threaten. I just gave him what he needed to see what I already knew. Because the system Matthew was trying to use against me was still operating on a foundation I had designed. And foundations don't forget. The office move came without warning. I returned from a lunch meeting to find my desk stripped bare, my belongings boxed neatly, a generic label printed on top. Cole, reassigned. No notice, no conversation. Facilities pointed me to a new workspace 3 floors down, adjacent to archives. No windows, no access badge reader, no nameplate. I didn't ask questions. I unpacked my things in silence, arranged them exactly as they were, down to the notepad placement, the keyboard angle. Because when systems shift abruptly, I watch how far they tilt before they break. And this system, it was already misaligned. That week, I noticed Eliza sitting in on retention briefings. She had a new badge, a faster laptop, and full access credentials to the same modeling tools I'd built from scratch. She wasn't malicious, she was just eager. The kind of eager that thinks novelty is the same as insight. Matthew started referring to her as the fresh set of eyes in meetings. I started calling her the variable, because Eliza wasn't the one rewriting policy, but she was now the one presenting models she didn't fully understand. Models lifted from my framework, repackaged under simplified filters, and renamed logic paths. On Thursday, I heard her laugh from across the open floor. Heavy-handed models preserve fear, she said, half joking. We're rebuilding trust, not control. No one corrected her. They didn't know what had been quietly removed, but I did. The live dashboards no longer flagged retention risk at the team lead level. Predictive attrition had been toggled off, too many false positives, according to Matthew. The result? Silence. Smooth reports and data that looked good until the floor fell out. So I sent another email, not to Seth this time, to Iris Tomlin, Senior Systems Owner for our employee sentiment platform. Subject: Pulse Survey Optimization, Confidential Body. Request to deploy optional sentiment overlay in Q3 cycle. Suggest enabling metadata capture by manager org tree. Suppress summary delivery until manual trigger. D. Cole, she responded within the hour. Understood, set to silent mode, logs preserved. No need for meetings, no explanation. Iris had seen these shifts before. She knew what came next, because this wasn't about emotion. It was about what happens when a system stops measuring what matters, just to make the wrong people feel comfortable. At week's end, I pulled up the retention anomaly model again. The one Matthew had buried. I updated 2 filters: Manager, M. Crane. Timeline, last 90 days. Risk profile, voluntary exits with prior engagement score above 80. Output, 3x resignation probability increase since Matthew's arrival. Signal loss detected, employee sentiment tracking disabled during Q2 cycle. Forecast trajectory, unstable. I didn't export the file, I didn't send it. I saved it in a drive Matthew didn't know existed. One I'd created during the merger back in 2018 when legal asked for a clean chain of custody on all system triggers. That chain still existed. And now it was warming up because Matthew hadn't just made a strategic error, he'd made a structural one. He believed he could use my system to write me out. But systems remember, especially the ones that were built never to forget. I didn't escalate, I didn't reply to HR, I didn't book a meeting with Matthew, I just started shifting the weight. The first signal came from Seth. He never responded to the note I sent after the salary cut. But one morning, as I passed him near the stairwell, he handed me a folded piece of paper. No words, no context, just a stat printed plainly in black and white. Q2 voluntary exits, Manager M. Crane, plus 21%. Top driver, loss of perceived leadership consistency. Below that, a timestamp, 3:47 a.m. He didn't need to say anything, because numbers speak louder than outrage when you know where to look. Seth had connected the dots. Now I just needed to keep the chain intact. Next was Iris. She'd already toggled the internal sentiment survey to manual hold at my request. A small, unnoticeable change, unless you knew what to expect. I sent her one more line. If clustering tags show manager-based concentration, suppress auto summaries. Just keep the logs clean. She didn't acknowledge. She didn't have to. We'd worked together long enough to understand. Some things are better seen than said. 3 days later, a silent notification appeared in my archive console, one of the old admin dashboards I still had access to, buried beneath the infrastructure logs. Trigger tag, sentiment anomaly, Zone 3A, Supervisor Group 104. That was Matthew's reporting group. I said nothing, because it still wasn't time to surface anything. It was time to watch what happened when no one smoothed the cracks. Then came Eliza. She meant well. Too eager, too fast, but eagerness without grounding always creates fractures. She uploaded a metrics file to the shared analytics channel. It was a recycled template with old formulas and stripped-down logic. She didn't realize the metadata still carried my name in the formula sheets. Didn't notice that the index tags didn't match the current model framework. She called it a revised approach. It was a diluted version of what I had once made surgical. Seth forwarded it to me. I replied, let it circulate, don't correct her. Because the goal wasn't to embarrass her, it was to let the system speak for itself. Matthew wanted clean decks, digestible insights, and low-friction projections. So I gave him what he wanted, models that looked pristine on the surface, but were empty underneath. No error messages, no red flags, just a structure that no longer protected itself. And while they ran that in public, I went back to something no one had touched in years. Fracture mapping. 5 years ago, during a merger, I helped infrastructure develop a monitoring tool designed to track workflow collapse before it turned into turnover. It had been shelved, too complex, too invisible. Now, I reopened it. I built a pattern. Approval chains with 3 or more unresolved hops. Calendar conflicts that appeared repeatedly in alignment meetings. Employee tickets routed to the wrong team 3 times or more. Over 10 days, the pattern became clear. Breakdown wasn't isolated, it centered, consistently, around one reporting line, Matthews. They weren't failing loudly, they were failing silently. So I started laying breadcrumbs, one conversation at a time. In the hallway, I bumped into Linda. Martin's internal strategy advisor. She greeted me cautiously, politely. She didn't know where I stood. I just said, if retention's falling faster than engagement, don't look at HR. Look at the spaces between approvals, the ones that used to close themselves. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time since the salary cut, I saw something change in her eyes. Not sympathy, recognition. That was enough, because retaliation makes noise. But redirection rewrites the whole system, quietly, line by line. It didn't start with a failure, it started with a duplication. A file, Eliza's again, circulated in the planning group with my original framework embedded beneath a new title. Cohort attrition overlay, revised. Same fields, same calculations. Except one variable was missing, risk tier weight by tenure. Without it, the model looked fine. Clean, predictable, except it couldn't distinguish between someone leaving after 2 months and someone walking out after 10 years. I didn't correct her, because if they were going to reduce my salary by ignoring nuance, they deserved to watch what happened when nuance disappeared from their metrics. That week, Matthew used Eliza's version in a leadership update to the CEO. He spoke confidently about flattening attrition curves and stabilized departure zones. Martin listened, nodded once, said nothing. But Linda forwarded me the deck 3 hours later. No message, no context, just the file. Just silence. That was her way of asking, "Is this real?" I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the version history log, quietly preserved in a sandbox system under my archival ID. I exported the original model, the one with tenure weighting, sentiment clusters, and manager consistency index intact. I renamed the file, retention model, full variables, D-col, internal only. Then I uploaded it to the shared library. No announcements, no tagging, no confrontation, just presence. It sat there for 3 days. Then, on the 4th, Seth pulled from it during a peer review session. No one objected. By the end of the week, it had been duplicated 6 times, each with a different timestamp, each by a different analyst, none of whom said my name, but all of them used my logic. Because they didn't have to endorse me, they just needed to be reminded what working data actually looked like. Meanwhile, the survey Iris had muted began showing pattern emergence. Sentiment scores were clustering, not around departments, not around tenure, around managers. One cluster in particular was trending below the 20th percentile for psychological safety, alignment, and leadership consistency. Supervisor ID, CRN 104, Matthew. The data didn't scream, it whispered, but it whispered everywhere. So I reached out to a contact I hadn't used in 2 years. Linda again, this time through a private, off-platform message. There's a reason we design sentiment overlays to be manager-aware. We don't measure for comfort, we measure for responsibility. She replied with 4 words, "I'm briefing Martin Monday." I didn't ask for a seat at that meeting. I didn't want one, because this wasn't about reclaiming space. It was about removing the illusion that anyone else had ever held it together. That weekend, I re-enabled a buried function in the retention dashboard. Dependency flag, original author unknown. It's a logic switch that activates when key data nodes become structurally unstable. Not broken, just misaligned enough that the system doesn't know who to trust. Once triggered, it does one thing. It waits. And if the original author doesn't return, the entire model drops into read-only. By Monday, 2 models had locked, 3 dashboards stalled, and no one, not Eliza, not Matthew, not even Seth, knew how to restart them. They were still looking for errors, but it wasn't an error, it was a reminder that you don't overwrite foundations and expect the structure to hold. The first person to leave didn't send a farewell email, he just stopped coming to meetings. Miguel Reyes, People Ops Manager for the Southeast region. 13 years in, never missed a cycle, never once escalated. I noticed his absence before anyone mentioned it. On Thursday, his profile disappeared from the org chart. By Friday, his access was marked inactive. No memo, no replacement. Eliza, when asked, mumbled something about talent mobility. But I knew better. Miguel had been the stabilizer, the one who held the floor steady while new leaders shuffled above. When people like Miguel walk out without warning, it isn't personal, it's structural. By the following week, 2 more silent exits followed. Naomi Zhang, Senior Learning Architect. Blake Osei, Workforce Planning Lead. Both gone. The pattern wasn't in what they said, it was in what they didn't leave behind. No knowledge transfers, no shared folders, no guidance memos, just space. Matthew didn't acknowledge it. He still wore the same tailored confidence, still presented the same polished updates. Bench depth is fluid, he told Linda in one leadership huddle. Some movement is healthy, but the slides behind him were thinning, each one shallower than the last, each one trying to explain why the numbers looked stable, while the people holding them had vanished. Linda didn't correct him. She just asked a single question. What's your current retention risk projection for Q4? Matthew hesitated. Eliza leaned in, whispered something. He clicked the slide. Blank. The dashboard had timed out. He said it was a server refresh. Iris and I both knew that was a lie. The timeout wasn't from load. It was from the dependency lock I'd enabled days before. The model was now read-only because the system didn't trust the logic anymore, because it no longer recognized the people making changes to it. Seth pinged me later that afternoon. System flagged CRN 104's dashboard as non-validated. You did this? I replied, no, the framework did. Because that was the point. It wasn't my hand pulling threads. It was the system I built doing what it was designed to do. Stop trusting inputs when the pattern of misuse becomes irreversible. Elsewhere, other signs appeared. Payroll requests looped without approval. Benefits reports showed negative attrition, an impossible metric. Performance reviews misaligned with manager cycles. Matthew called them technical dust. But they weren't glitches. They were gaps. Tiny delays in logic that only appear when no one is holding the bridge between numbers and meaning. And when the bridge fails quietly, people don't scream. They just stop walking across it. Matthew responded the only way he knew how. With a deck, 36 slides, custom design, soft gradients, buzzwords with shadows behind the text. Reframing engagement, re-energizing talent value, narrative over numbers. He clicked through them one by one, speaking with certainty, as if the structure wasn't quietly sinking behind him. Martin, the CEO, said nothing. Linda sat 2 chairs away, fingers steepled, watching every word. Eliza hovered near the screen, ready to interject, but the opportunity never came, because the data kept failing. Slide 11, turnover by tenure. The graph loaded, then blinked, then returned. Data set invalid, source attribution missing. Matthew waved it off. We're in the middle of a sync migration. Slide 18, exit interview insights. All responses showed NA. He blamed HR processing. Slide 25, predictive model. Unavailable, logic suspended pending owner verification. That was the one that landed. Martin leaned forward. What owner? Matthew froze. Eliza looked down. Linda turned her head slightly. That model was authored pre-realignment, she said calmly. System won't run until the original logic path is revalidated. Silence. Matthew tried to recover. We've rebuilt much of that internally. Martin interrupted. Then why is retention still falling? The room stilled. No answer. Because underneath the missing charts and broken dashboards was a truth no one wanted to say out loud. The models weren't broken. They were refusing to run because they no longer trusted who was touching them. Later that day, I received a message, not through company channels, a personal note, from Naomi Jang, who had left 2 weeks earlier. I waited for them to fix it, but they removed the only one who knew how. That's when I stopped waiting. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't even emotional. She was just clear. That's what happens when you take away structural intelligence and try to replace it with optics. You get silence, then you get exits, then you get collapse. Eliza resigned the following Monday. No fanfare, no memo. She left behind a folder titled Transition Docs. Inside, 1 spreadsheet, 3 broken formulas, 1 unreadable chart. No one touched it. Matthew tried to pivot. He proposed a new People Systems Council, said it would be collaborative, cross-functional, legacy agnostic. Martin declined the suggestion in 1 sentence. We don't need a council. We need someone who understands what held this place together. That same afternoon, Linda requested a full audit of every policy change made under Matthew's tenure, not because she suspected fraud, because she suspected removal of logic, of consistency, of the glue between data and behavior. And when the audit system asked for owner reauthentication, it showed my name, not once, but across 72 files, all marked inactive but intact. I didn't need to return. The system had never left. It was just waiting for everyone else to notice. The request came in quietly at first, a ticket from payroll, access denied to benefits eligibility log, a message from talent systems, Legacy headcount matrix not syncing with new review cycle. A note from legal. Unable to locate revised retention clause in compliance template library. Each one marked urgent. Each one routed to Matthew's team. Each one returned unanswered. Because no one on that team knew where the original logic lived. I did, but no one had asked. Not out of malice. Out of habit. They'd spent months pretending I wasn't needed. Now they couldn't remember how to ask for what I once held. By midweek, the absence began compounding. Approval chains stalled, compensation models froze, manager dashboards went dark mid-presentation. Matthew called it a load spike. He blamed the system architecture. He blamed vendor latency. He blamed process fatigue. But the issue wasn't speed, it was trust. The system had begun rejecting inputs, not because they were wrong, but because they came from profiles it no longer recognized as structurally valid. When I built the framework years ago, I included one safeguard. If the original authorship of a critical logic path was severed, and if more than 5 unauthorized revisions occurred, the system would shift into observer mode. Not delete, not crash, just stop executing decisions. It was a way to protect the company from itself. Now, that protection was fully active. Eliza's exit had triggered the final threshold. Matthew didn't know it, but the architecture had already stopped listening to him. Martin noticed. He didn't say it outright, but he began skipping Matthew's syncs. He started calling Linda into 1-1s instead. He reactivated a dormant channel called Continuity Framework Review. Only 3 people were granted access. I was one of them. I didn't respond to the invite. But I saw the list, and I saw what it meant. They weren't building something new. They were trying to recover something old, something they'd erased too fast. That Friday, the final sign came. An internal announcement meant to reassure staff. Leadership is reviewing key systems for long-term sustainability. We appreciate your patience as we transition to a more resilient operating model. No one believed it, because by now, the silence wasn't confusing anymore. It was familiar, the kind of silence that follows when the one who used to hold everything together simply lets go. It ended with a question, not from me, not from legal, from the CEO. Martin walked into the Monday sync with a single printout. No slides, no preamble. He placed the page in front of Matthew and said, "This is your Q3 retention summary, correct?" Matthew glanced down, confused. "Yes, that's what Eliza finalized before." Martin tapped the lower corner. "Why does the underlying model say, author inactive, context unverified?" Matthew opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "We've been running a rebuilt version. The original was too complex, not scalable." Martin leaned back, then explained the spike. 4 director-level resignations, 8 mid-managers, feedback loops empty, engagement scores collapsed. If this version is better, why is it failing everywhere it's deployed? Silence. Across the table, Linda didn't move. She didn't need to, because the answer was already clear. The model wasn't the problem. The absence of the person behind it was. After the meeting, no announcement was made. No title revoked, no dramatic exit. But Matthew stopped showing up to strategy calls. 3 days later, his profile was marked on special assignment. People understood what that meant, and for the first time in months, no one asked for clarification. Because collapse doesn't always arrive like an explosion. Sometimes it arrives as a slow reversal of authority, of attention, of relevance. And when it does, no one needs to vote. The structure simply recalibrates around the one person it no longer follows. Meanwhile, I received a message. Internal, unexpected, from Martin. Subject, Legacy Retention Systems, request for context. Message, we're reviewing policy logic for long-term continuity. Would appreciate your input on the original framework, specifically how manager consistency was quantified. I didn't reply immediately. I waited. 2 days later, Linda followed up. Her message was shorter. If you're willing, we'll listen properly this time. I still didn't accept, because I didn't need a seat. I needed them to remember what happens when the person holding the structure steps aside, just far enough for gravity to finish its work. That same week, another resignation came through. Seth. No fanfare, no speech, just a locked folder, a clean transfer, and a single forwarded file to my personal inbox. Original risk logic, preserved version, final. He wrote nothing else. He didn't have to, because those who saw it unravel knew this wasn't about sabotage. It was about stewardship and what happens when it's lost. I never stepped back into the building, not when the dashboard failed, not when the audit exposed the misalignment. Not even when Martin quietly requested a consultation off record. I had already left, not officially, not with a resignation letter. But the day I disabled authorship verification from my frameworks was the day I let the structure speak on its own, and it did. Loudly, quietly, all at once. They didn't ask me to return. They asked how long I had known it would unravel. The answer? I didn't wait for collapse. I designed the structure to collapse cleanly, when misused. The week after Matthew disappeared from the org chart, I got a message from Seth, now working independently. It was a short file, 1 table, 2 columns, left because she was gone, left because she was erased. He had anonymized the exit interviews, compiled statements from the past 2 quarters. There were no names, no details, just variations of one truth. It stopped making sense when she stopped being heard. At my new office, half the size, twice as quiet, I printed that table and pinned it behind my screen, not as proof, as context, because this new place didn't ask me to perform legacy. They asked me to prevent loss. My title was soft, Strategic Continuity Director. No one outside the org understood what that meant, but the people inside did. They didn't come to me with slogans. They came with broken logic chains, with workflows too fragile to scale, with policies that made sense on paper, but not in motion. And I gave them what FerroCore once had. Not protection, precision. In my 2nd month, I started a quiet cohort. No announcement, no slide deck, just an invite list. People over 40, women who had returned after caregiving breaks, operators who'd survived too many reorganizations to trust performance reviews. We met every Thursday. 1 room, 1 whiteboard, no titles. The first session was silent. Then one woman, Celia, a compliance analyst, spoke up. They said I was too slow to lead, but I was the only one who never dropped a step. Heads nodded. No applause, no affirmation, just recognition. By the 4th session, the room was full. By the 6th, people started staying late. Because when you rebuild from silence, you don't need noise. You need structure that listens better than the people who erased you. 2 months after the audit, I received one final message from FerroCore. It came through Linda. Personal inbox. No subject line, just a forwarded memo from the board. All models, logic paths, and frameworks authored prior to Q2 are now classified as legacy critical systems. Review required. Original contributors to be contacted for reconstruction or archival advisement. No greeting, no signature, just that line. It didn't ask me to return. It asked if I'd ever really left. I didn't reply. Because legacy doesn't ask permission. It lives in what's still standing when people forget how it was held up. In my new office, things are quieter. The dashboards are smaller, the budget's tighter, but no one here confuses confidence with competence. No one builds decks to justify the failure of systems they don't understand. They ask better questions, like, how do we protect what works before it breaks? What does stability look like when no one's looking? And the best one I've heard so far, what did your last place forget that we shouldn't? I don't answer with stories, I answer with structure. One week I walked into a meeting and saw Celia from the quiet cohort leading a session. She stood before the room, not loud, not commanding, but grounded. She pointed at a diagram I'd helped her build and said, "We don't need to move faster, we need to stop bleeding value through unaccounted exits." No one challenged her, they listened. After the meeting, she stopped by my desk. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She just left a note, folded once, placed neatly next to my keyboard. You didn't rebuild a system, you rebuilt the right to build one at all. I kept that note, not as proof, but as evidence that the next person wouldn't have to carry it alone. That evening, as the building dimmed and the day closed, I looked over my shoulder. At a quiet floor, clean handoffs, no escalations, and a dashboard that responded exactly as it should. No noise, no panic, just logic, holding steady. And I knew I never needed a title to prove what I built. I just needed to step far enough back for them to see what broke when I was gone and what began to heal when I didn't come back. Because systems don't remember who shouted the loudest. They remember who made them make sense. And that they can never overwrite.